Hi there, welcome back to Azure Bicep from scratch. I'm Praveen Singh, and this is episode number 3. If you haven't seen the episode 1 and 2, where we set up everything and deployed our first storage account, I'll link those in the cards above and in the description below. And if you have not subscribed to the channel, please pump the subscribe button and come join my learning community. Right now, this template only works for one thing: the storage account, one name, one region, and one SKU. If I need a dev environment and a production environment, I would have to copy the entire file, change every value by hand. That's exactly the kind of thing infra as code is supposed to prevent. Alright, so today we are going to make this template actually reusable. By the end of this episode, you will be able to deploy the same template to dev, stage, and production with different settings using parameter files. And I'm going to show you how to conditionally deploy resources so that certain things only exist in certain environments. And that's the pattern you will use on every real project. Let's get into it. Alright, so let's make this template flexible. Parameters let you pass values at the deployment time instead of hard coding them. They go at the top of the file above your resources. So I'm declaring 3 parameters today. The first one is param storage account name. And this is the param keyword you use to declare a parameter. And then type a name and then the type of that name of the parameter. This one is a string with no default value. That means when you deploy this, you have to provide the value. If you don't, the deployment will fail immediately. The second param I'm using here is going to be location. I'll use the string type. And for this one, I'm going to use something special, which is resource group brackets and dot location. This one has a default value already. If you don't pass the location, it's going to use the resource group's location. And that's the resource group with the brackets dot location expression, which is a built-in bicep function. What it does is simply grabs the location of the resource group that you're deploying your resources into. I use this on almost every template because it means resources are all automatically going to be deployed in the same region as the resource group, unless you say explicitly. The third one that I'm going to use here is param SKU name. It's going to be a string type again, and I'm going to make it equal to standard LRS. Same idea, we default to standard LRS and you can override it to GRS or GRS at the deployment time if you want to. All of these values are default values, so if you do override them during the deployment time, they are definitely going to be respected. Now I'm going to update the resources to actually use these parameters. You see the difference? Instead of hard-coded strings in the codes, I'm refactoring the parameter names. So there's no quotations required anywhere around the names because they're not string anymore. They're just referencing the bicep parameter during the deployment time. Now let me show you decorators because these are super important. Decorators add guardrails to your parameters. For the storage account name, I'm going to add a min length of 3 and max length of 24. These enforce length constraint before the deployment even reaches Azure. For example, if somebody were to pass in a name that is 2 characters or 40 characters, the bicep compiler will catch it right away. Remember the error we saw in the episode 2 where the name was too long? The decorators prevent that from ever happening. The description is another one, which is fairly common, where you describe what is this variable about and give some documentation about it. It shows up anytime somebody use your template or your module, so it's super important to define. Coming to the parameters such as queue names, there's one we always use is called allowed. This one is fairly straightforward. You simply type in what are the allowed values that this parameters can support. In this case, I'm going to just pick some of these default. It's giving me LRS, GRS, and I'm going to remove the premium and the RA. So what it does is it tells anybody using the template that these are the only 2 values you are supposed to use. So if somebody were to pass in a different SKU, the template will not go through. There's one more decorator you should know about, which we are not using in this template here, but that is called secure, which is mainly used for passwords and anywhere in the production where you are using any secure values or environment variables. When we get to the more complex templates later in the series, this will become very important. So parameters are the values that come from outside the template, as we just saw. Now, coming to the variables, these are something you compute inside the template. So both have different purposes. So I'm going to define the Here's the common pattern. You want a unique name for your storage account, but you don't want someone to have to come up with a globally unique name every single time they deploy a resource. So I'm declaring two variables. First one is going to be unique suffix. So what I'm doing here is I'm using two functions provided within the bicep function series itself. The first one is unique string. We already saw the resource group here, which is going to be a similar one, but in this case, I'm trying to grab the resource group ID of the resource group we are going to use for deployment. And I'm going to convert that into a deterministic hash based on the value. So this value is always going to be 13 characters long. Now, there may be some cases where you don't want it to be 13 character long. That's where we use substrings. It's not required all the time, but just so you know, if your name of the storage account is too long as an input, then you might want some constraints or restrictions on how long your storage account name turns out to be in the end. So in this case, I'm scoping the unique suffix to be always 8 characters long. So in this case, if somebody were to pass in a 5 or 10 character long storage account name as a parameter input, I would still be okay with running through this. The second one I'm going to use is going to be storage account name with suffix. So in this case, I will put st in the front and use the storage account name as an input from the user and put my suffix in the end. So anytime a storage account name is determined, it's always going to be unique because the suffix is always going to be different for every single resource group. So now it's time to replace our storage account name here with the suffix. So when should you use parameter versus variable? Here's the mental model I use. If the value should be different every time somebody deploys a template, that's the parameter. If value is derived from the other values and shouldn't change independently, that is variable. The storage account name that comes from the user is a parameter. The unique suffix computed from the resource group is going to be the variable. So now if I have to deploy this template, I'll have to pass on these parameter values using something called dash dash param, and I have to define the whole thing here. Or I have to just do this storage account. And this may work for one or two parameters, but once you have 10, 15, 20, it's not really feasible or maintainable anymore. That's where the parameter file comes in. So I'm going to create a new file and give it a name of dev-bicep-ram. The first statement I'm going to use in this file is going to be using for main. And I'm just going to do this. All right, this is super important because it tells the parameter files which template it belongs to. And because of that link, you get the full intelligence in the parameter file. In this case, if I hover, I can already see the storage account file name. Storage account name has to be defined first. So I set the storage account name to be cloud with syncs, EWS as a short term. And I'm going to define the SKU name as well to be, let's just pick GRS because I want it to be different from what I have as a default value. And just to show you, if I do pick a different one that's not in the scope, I'm gonna get the error right away saying I can only choose either GRS or LRS as defined. So one template, and we can have multiple parameter files based on this now. Let me deploy this same template here using easy group create and template file. And I'm just going to pass in the parameter file name. While that's happening, what I'm going to do is go ahead and create a new file called prod.bicepparam. And I'm just going to copy everything. And in this case, I'll say this is PRD. And in this case, I'm just going to pick LRS and I'm going to start a new terminal and run this command to deploy the second parameter as well. But in this case, I'm going to use prod instead of dev. All right, we have two storage accounts deployed, one for production, one for dev. using the same bicep template. So we have two storage accounts. One is called stcws, one we just saw, and then second is stprd. We saw the st is the prefix which we hard coded within the template itself, and everything else is coming out either through the input and then the unique suffix. And you can see both of them are following the kernel central because that's where the location of the resource group is. Now let me show you one more thing, the conditions, because sometimes you want a resource to exist in production but not in the dev. Maybe a diagnostic settings, maybe blob container, or could be any monitoring resource. You don't want to maintain two separate templates for this. You want one template that's smart enough to skip resources based on the flag. I'm going to add a boolean parameter here called deploy blob container, and in this case I'll leave it to true for default. All right, let's add a resource to deploy a blob container. In this case, just gonna pick this first. Come back to the dev and just say I don't want this to be deployed on dev, but I do want it to be deployed on production. So I'm just gonna run through both deployments again, one at a time, and let's wait for it to finish. All right, I add this simple resource blob container resource, which simply just creates a new container called my container. And this is scoped with the deploy blob container. And we just defined these two parameters called deploy blob container to be false for dev and true for production. And I've already went ahead and deployed the production one. So let's just take a look at what we have. In this case, the dev is still in progress. While that's happening, let's just go take a look at the production containers. And you can see the my container is already here in the production storage account. In a couple of seconds, we should see the dev one working as well. And once the dev is also finished, so I can see the dev one just finished deployment. Looking at the containers, there is no container inside the dev storage account. I've used this pattern a lot in client environments, things like log analytics workspace, diagnostic settings, and private endpoints. All of these resources that are critical in production but unnecessary overhead in dev, this can all be handled through one template just using conditions. All right, let me recap what we covered because we moved fast. Parameters, the values that come from outside the template. Use the param keyword, give it the name and type, and optionally a default value. You can also add decorators like minimum length, max length, allowed descriptions, and secure to add guardrails and the documentation. The variables are values you compute inside the template. You use var, give it a name and a value. Bicep already infers the type. So you use unique string for deterministic unique value and names, and $sign curly braces for string interpolation. Parameter files is .bicepparam file that pairs with the template via the using statement. One template, multiple parameter files, and multiple environments. And finally, the conditions, the if keyword on the resource declaration. Deploy a resource only when condition is true. Now here's what I want you to notice. We started the episode with 3-line resource group. Episode 2, we added a storage account with the output, and now we have parameter, variable, parameter file, conditional deployment. Every episode builds on the last one. Same project, more capability. In the next episode, we are going to tackle the modules. Right now, everything is in one file, and that's fine for now. But in the real world, your template grows and single file with networking, storage, compute, and monitoring all mixed together becomes really impossible to maintain. Module lets you break down stuff into smaller, reusable pieces. One for networking, one for storage, one for compute, and they snap together. That's the episode number 4. If you're not subscribed to the channel, please bump the subscribe button and come join my learning community. Alright, I will see you in the next one. Until then, stay curious and keep building.